Very interesting points that I'm sure we will go for another round. So first 7, please. The conversation between the Peace and Security Council and the President.
This is the first continental-wide meeting of the civil society members of the International Coalition for the Responsibility to Protect. As Don mentioned, today's dialogue is to reflect on the implementation of both Article 4H of the Constitutive Act of the African Union and the responsibility to protect. It's the first coalition-wide meeting on the continent on the protection of civilians from genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and ethnic cleansing.
Issues that will be interesting to.
A major objective of the Stanley Foundation and our collaborators here regarding these dialogues was to seek out voices from the field, men and women who have had to develop innovative ways to work in difficult and oftentimes violent environments. Civil society has a specific responsibility, and that is to give voice to a wide variety of sectors and to enrich and support public participation in democracy.
The key issues that have come up, just before we go, and maybe some.
Even those that have advocated for their right, the Chatilo, the Kunduwai, and all.
Article 4H of the Constitutive Act and the Constitutive Act generally should not be viewed in isolation, but they should be viewed in the broader context of the AU that would include the African peer review mechanism, the African peace and security architecture, and the African governance architecture.
There's a conflict between the sovereignty principle and RTP.
Article 4H gives rise to the debate on what should Africa do in terms of the implementation of that, and in terms of how do you begin to apply the principle of non-indifference. And what comes up is the discussion and eventual adoption of the protocol relating to the establishment of the Peace and Security Council of the African Union. And enshrined in that protocol is first and foremost the right of the AU to intervene in certain conditions, particularly grave circumstances. And secondly, the right of AU member states to call upon the AU or member states of the AU to intervene when a country is facing grave circumstances. That could not have been done under the OAU, even if Rwanda had requested intervention. The OAU did not have an instrument that would have allowed it to intervene. And therefore, most of our activities in terms of the AU's responsibility on prevention and response is what is enshrined in the protocol relating to the establishment of the Peace and Security Council.
Stated specifically the issue that we should look at the early.
On a créé ce nouveau mécanisme et on oublie que ce nouveau mécanisme, quand on lit de manière très rapprochée aussi bien l'acte constitutif que le protocole sur le Conseil de paix et de sécurité, c'est qu'il y a un conflit latent entre le concept de souveraineté qui est mis en exergue et qui est quand même mis avant les dispositions relatives à la responsabilité de protéger et la responsabilité de protéger. Donc, c'est un point. Et en droit, vous savez, quand on dispose les normes d'une certaine manière, ça a une certaine signification. Je voulais juste mettre cela en exergue parce que je reviendrai là-dessus. Les États africains sont allés même plus loin parce qu'ils ont mis en place un conseil de paix et de sécurité dont 2 dispositions fondamentales, les articles 3 et les articles 4, sur les objectifs et sur les principes de fonctionnement sont très clairs et qui mettent aussi en exergue cette tension entre la souveraineté et la responsabilité de protéger.
Atrocity. Why don't you give all this money? in as much as justice needs to be done. Immediately, if you are going to wait for AU to come with a solution, it's not.
One of the things that you find in the work of the Peace and Security Council, as far as Article 4H is concerned, the obvious position is that there was no time at which the African Union expressly invoked Article 4H. So Article 4H essentially seems to have remained an article that has that have no operational reality to date. The question that you ask is whether or not we haven't witnessed during the existence of the Peace and Security Council since 2004 situations that warrant the invocation of Article 4H of the Constitutive Act. My reading of the work of the Peace and Security Council is that, yes, expressly Article 4H was not invoked. The only time that it was invoked was in one session of the Peace and Security Council dealing with Darfur. And even then, there was only one line which said that the situation in Darfur doesn't constitute genocide. Now ask yourself, on what basis did the Peace and Security Council arrive at such a conclusion? Was an investigation undertaken? And so on and so forth. So that is one thing. And how about other cases? Which is, how about war crimes? How about crimes against humanity? Didn't those take place in Darfur? And if they did, why didn't we say anything about them? My reading is this one. The African Union seems to recognize its limitations. If it invokes Article 4H, then it means that a number of consequences would follow. That may make the position of the African Union extremely difficult, and whatever leverage that it may have in influencing, the situation on the ground would be lost in the process. So the approach that the African Union took was it avoided the express invocation of Article 4H, but acted in such a way that it would be able to come to the rescue of those affected communities. That's what it did in the case of Darfur, basically, against a government that was intransigent, that was resistant of any international or foreign intervention in the country.
James is just going to go and respond to something else.
I'd just like to respond.
Mine is not a question, but it's an intervention in terms of
Where does the civil society go? What is their role? And this is an opportunity today to hear from people whose organizations engage on a level, on a grassroots level in their own countries with their own governments as well as with the AU. Understanding that it's not always easy and it's not always straightforward on who to go to, where to go, how to engage policymakers, how to get the decision makers to listen to you. But it is an opportunity to learn from how some organizations and how some people have been doing it. And I think part of what is important here is for us to be able to learn and to hear about the challenges and how to, and good best practices and good recommendations for how we should move forward.
When this thing happened, in terms of resolving them, it's hard.
The AU intervention in Kenya at a diplomatic level did not stop at the peace agreement, but continued after to ensure that the reforms agreed upon in the agreement continued and were fully implemented. And this is how Kenya came up with a new constitution which addressed part of these historical injustices. Now, there's been a push and pull with regard to progress and reform and how far reforms will go, because there are those who prefer the status quo and there are those who prefer support these reforms. So those reforms have had their challenges, but they have gone somewhere. The most difficult has been with the Truth, Justice and Reconciliation Commission.
to broaden the involvement of broader civil society across the continent to make inputs.
So I wanted all of us to be thinking of not only of diagnosing, as some of us were saying, how do we prevent it? The prevention is one thing, and then also the cure, it is another. We are now in a tragic humanitarian situation, but how do we prevent something like this to happen in any new country like South Sudan? Is to know the trigger, but not how you resolve your problem.
Conversation between the Peace and Security Council and the President.
parti de Nova.